Hello, everyone. This is Asian Anthony, and today we're going to talk about the difference between living in Southeast Asia and living in Latin America. Now, as a quick background, I am an American from California, Los Angeles, and I have lived and worked all throughout the Southeast Asian region, and I have lived in not all of, but many different Latin American countries. So, what I'm going to tell you is coming from the years of experience. Now, I don't want to bury the lead here, so I'm just going to give you the answer. Which is better, Southeast Asia or Latin America? Southeast Asia. And to be honest, it's not even close. But let me explain to you exactly why. First, let's talk about the affordability. Now, Southeast Asia is obviously very cheap, it's very affordable, it's easy to buy food, it's easy to even have common luxuries to like condos, living in the nicer neighborhoods, etc., exactly as you would expect. But Latin America, not so simple. It's deceptively expensive. And this is because in Latin America, you are not free to live in any part of the city because of the crime factor. So, for example, when I moved to Colombia, there were cheaper options to live, but you quickly find out that you're not welcome to just go to any neighborhood to live there. So that's point one for Southeast Asia. It is far more affordable. Now let's move on to the next one. This is the obvious. Southeast Asia is obviously going to win this too. We're going to talk about the crime. Okay. Now in Southeast Asia, almost no violent crime. You don't really see it. But I will say, after living in Thailand for a while, there was gun violence. I've even been there for a school shooting a few years ago. People do fight on the streets, but it's rare and it's very understandable. It's not like random crime. But I would say Southeast Asia is extremely safe. I also lived in Vietnam, never saw anything in Vietnam. I'm currently in Myanmar, a country that is at war. They say they're at war. I've never even seen a police officer here. No crime, extremely peaceful. Now let's juxtapose that to Latin America. Now we all know Latin America has a bad rap for being filled with crime. But let me take this one step further. Crime statistics in Latin America make no sense because, from my experience, they have no way of, collecting data on their crime because crime mostly is not reported. So you might look up the crime statistics in, say, Panama or Peru, and it might look low on paper. But when you get there, you realize most crime is not being reported. And also, you as a foreigner, especially as American, are more likely to be the victim of a crime because you don't speak the language. You could easily be fooled, tricked, you get lost a lot, etc., etc. I would say Latin America is very violent, to be quite honest with you. And this is coming from an American's perspective, so that should tell you something right there. But let's move on. Racism for black people or xenophobia if you're a white person. Now, racism and xenophobia takes a very weird turn in Southeast Asia. Uh, Surprisingly, they have a lot of friendly rivalries with other Asians. For example, most Asians in Southeast Asia, they like in Vietnam, they look down upon the Filipino people, but they didn't hate them. Almost everyone in Southeast Asia has negative views of Chinese people, but they don't hate Chinese people. They're friendly with them, but behind closed doors, if you befriend them, you ask, a random Vietnamese person, "Oh, how do you feel about China?" They'll say, "Oh, I don't like Chinese people," but it's not really hate. Latin America, oh my God. As a black person, I definitely felt it. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever been a victim of racism or open, blatant racism until I got to Latin America, specifically Colombia, which surprised me the most. I don't really want to get into too many details because I don't want to overstate it. It's not that bad, but it's definitely worse than America, a place that I've almost experienced no racism. And it's definitely the first place that made me think about the color of my skin. Um, just let me give you an example. A black male there almost never interracially dates unless you're a foreigner. But a black woman there, Yeah, it's a little different. They pretty much accept the women because who doesn't like women, you know? But black people in like Brazil, they live in like little corners and they're not even seen as truly um, one of the normal people. You know, they're not they're still not integrated. In Colombia, in the north, you see a lot of heavy um, black African people, but they still keep their African culture. So they are very different, you know, and they're treated differently too in every way. I don't want to talk too much about this because I don't want to overstate it, but let me just say, definitely a win for Southeast Asia. Okay, but next, okay, the nightlife. Now, I'm gonna have to give this one to Latin America. Okay, they know how to party. They have better music. They know how to dance better. They party all night. Um, you juxtapose that to Southeast Asia. Still lots of fun. Still a lot of great nightlife scenes. But in Latin America, when you want to have fun, it's very Western. It's very they play a lot of rap music, a lot of big pop songs. But in Latin America, they don't need to do that because they have their own. They have their reggaeton. They have their own like Mexican bands, and they have their own nightlife party culture. And for sure, it's far more fun if you're into that type of stuff. I'm not really big into drinking like that, but if you want to go to a nightclub, Latin America definitely the better option. So that's point one for Latin America. The food, not close, not close at all. Latin America, home to Mexico. Mexico, undefeated when it comes to food. Okay. Southeast Asia, they have a lot of their foods seem very similar, you know, from Vietnam to Indonesia to Myanmar, Thailand, Laos. You know, it's a lot of just like rice and some like random meat. Not very exciting. And I would say in Vietnam, for example, the food was just terrible. And it was just terrible. Okay. Love Vietnam, but their food was very bland. They did a lot of like boiled meats with barely any seasoning. The dishes don't even look exciting. They don't even look appealing. They eat a lot of random birds. Of course, in Vietnam, yes, they do eat dogs and they do eat cat soup, and it is very popular. And they eat bugs, you know. These things I'm not into. But in Latin America, the food the food it's not all Mexican food, obviously. You know, you go to like Brazil, the food in Brazil is very different than the food in Mexico, and the food in Mexico is very different than the food in Colombia. But just in general, the food there is superior, significantly superior, I would say. And I think this has a lot to do with the Mexican influence because, oh my goodness, okay. So 2 points for Latin America. And let's talk about the dating scene there. Okay, that's very important for me as a single male in my mid 30s. The dating scene, I mean, it all depends on what you like, but I'm just going to say this. In general, okay, this is a personal preference. Okay, it's not always true. Asians make better wives. Latin women just have better curves. Okay, they just, depending on what you like, they're easier on the eyes. Okay, but I would say would definitely the Asian women just seem to be undefeated in the marriage market. If you truly care about being married, you know, like I am, definitely go for Asian over Latin. Not always. This is a personal preference. If you like, you know, the peach, go Latin America. The best shapes. But you know, if you're into more of a more tame, I don't know if I should use the word tame, but if you're into something more suitable for somebody who's ready to sit down, definitely go Asian. Okay, so another point for Southeast Asia. And the last one, this is just overall lifestyle, you know, when it comes to things like transportation, the ease of access when it comes to opening a business, started going to work. Definitely, I would say Southeast Asia, and it's not even close. Um, in Latin America, I didn't even trust the taxi drivers. You know, I've been kicked out of taxis because I didn't speak Spanish. You won't see something like that in Southeast Asia. Also, I work in Southeast Asia. I never got the chance to work in Latin America. I'm not even I wasn't interested, but I can work here. It is definitely easy to get visas here, business visas here. It's just more suitable for investment. It's more not the best, okay? There are lots of problems, but when you compare it to Latin America, definitely just the lifestyle here is better. If you are an expat or a digital nomad and you're looking for a base, somewhere to permanently station yourself, Southeast Asia, okay? To visit Latin America, great job. I recommend it. But to live in Latin America, I do not recommend it. So once again, got to get the point to Latin America. Okay, so if we're keeping score here, I would say Southeast Asia 3 or 4, and Latin America 2. So Southeast Asia for the win. And there you go.